In the remote Nevada desert during the winter of 1887, railroad workers unearthed 97 female skeletons beneath the ruins of the Golden Rose Saloon. Identical signs of violence were found on each victim. The official territorial report was sealed immediately after 3 investigating officers, unable to cope with what they'd witnessed, requested transfers. For over a century, this mass grave remained unexplained until documents discovered recently revealed the truth about 4 sisters who operated the most systematic murder enterprise in the history of the American frontier. Before the story of the Everhart Sisters continues, make sure to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from, because this tale proves that the most terrifying monsters weren't supernatural beings, but ordinary people capable of extraordinary evil. Even more chilling is how the Everhart sisters managed to operate for nearly 10 years without suspicion, using the lawless nature of frontier society and the systematic corruption of local officials to mask their crimes in plain sight while accumulating a fortune that would be worth millions today. Nevada's Silver Creek emerged from nothing in 1868 when prospector Jacob Steinberg discovered a rich silver vein in the Barren Hills, 40 miles southeast of Carson City. This discovery occurred during one of the region's rare winter storms when Steinberg, seeking shelter in a shallow cave, noticed glittering deposits in the rock walls. What began as a handful of canvas tents and crude wooden shanties transformed within months of filing his claim into a bustling mining town of nearly 4,000 souls, mostly men seeking fortune in the unforgiving Nevada desert, where summer temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees and winter nights could drop below freezing. By 1870, Silver Creek had evolved into one of Nevada's most prosperous mining communities, with the Silver Dollar Mine producing thousands of ounces of precious metal monthly and supporting a complex network of businesses, services, and entertainment establishments. The town's isolation worked to its advantage during the silver boom, as the nearest law enforcement sat a full day's hard ride away through treacherous mountain passes, and territorial officials rarely ventured into the harsh landscape unless absolutely necessary. This remoteness created a perfect environment for those seeking to operate outside the boundaries of conventional law and morality. The Silver Dollar Mine, which gave the town its economic foundation, operated around the clock with 3 shifts of workers descending into tunnels that eventually reached depths of over 600 feet below ground. An atmosphere where unusual sounds or odors from other sources could easily be masked or dismissed was created by the constant noise of mining equipment, the acrid smell of blasting powder, and the choking dust that perpetually hung in the air. At its peak, the mine employed over 800 workers, creating a steady demand for housing, food, entertainment, and other services that made Silver Creek one of the most economically vibrant communities in the territory. The community that sprouted around Steinberg's mine reflected the rough and tumble nature of frontier life, but with an unusual degree of organization and sophistication that would later prove significant to our story. For nearly 3/4 of a mile, Main Street stretched, lined with wooden buildings that ranged from hastily constructed saloons to substantial structures housing the town's essential businesses. The unofficial town center was the Silver Creek General Store, owned by German immigrant Heinrich Müller, where news, gossip, and rumors circulated with equal intensity. Müller's establishment also functioned as the informal post office, bank, and message center, roles that would later prove crucial in tracking the mysterious disappearances that plagued the community. A unique social structure was created by the town's demographics, one that the Everhart sisters would later exploit with deadly efficiency. Men outnumbered women by a ratio of nearly 30-1, creating intense competition for female companionship and making women's businesses extremely profitable. Exaggerated courtesy and protection were given to the few respectable women in town, mostly wives of mine foremen, the school teacher Miss Catherine Peaton, 2 seamstresses, a handful of shopkeepers' wives, and the occasional female relative visiting from back east. This reverent attitude toward respectable women would later provide perfect cover for the sisters' operation, as community members were reluctant to question the activities of women who appeared to uphold moral standards in a town where such standards were often ignored. Into this harsh but prosperous environment came the Everhart sisters in the spring of 1870, arriving on the weekly supply wagon from Carson City during the first week of May when desert wildflowers briefly transformed the landscape into a carpet of yellow and purple blooms. The sisters, Greta, aged 32, Wilhelmina, aged 30, Margot, aged 28, and Adelaide, aged 25, carried only several worn leather trunks and a leather satchel containing what they claimed were letters of introduction from Carson City businessmen, who had recommended Silver Creek as a promising location for establishing a boarding house and hospitality establishment for respectable working women. The eldest and obvious leader of the group, Greta, possessed striking auburn hair that she wore pinned in the elaborate style fashionable among educated Eastern women, and piercing green eyes that seemed to evaluate everyone she met with unsettling intensity. She commanded attention whenever she entered a room, standing nearly 5 feet 8 inches tall, unusually tall for women of that era. A woman of exceptional intelligence was how those who encountered her described her, speaking with the refined accent of someone educated back east, possibly in Philadelphia or Boston, though she remained deliberately vague about their background when questioned. Her hands, which she kept carefully gloved even in the desert heat, bore no calluses or other signs of manual labor, suggesting a privileged upbringing that made their presence in a rough mining town all the more mysterious. The second eldest, Wilhelmina, served as the group's financial administrator and record keeper. Pale blonde hair and sharp blue eyes that missed no detail of any transaction or conversation were what she possessed. While initially appearing more reserved than her dominant older sister, careful observers noted that Wilhelmina's quiet demeanor masked a calculating intelligence that made her equally formidable in business dealings. She carried herself with the precision of someone accustomed to managing complex financial arrangements and maintaining detailed records. The third sister, Margot, handled much of the group's correspondence and public relations. She possessed dark brown hair and warm hazel eyes that created an impression of approachability and trustworthiness, qualities that would prove essential in attracting unsuspecting victims to their establishment. Her manner was engaging and sympathetic, making her particularly effective at gaining the confidence of young women seeking employment or assistance. With genuine seeming concern, she spoke about the difficulties faced by women trying to make their way on the frontier, a persona that masked her true predatory nature. The youngest, Adelaide, appeared the most conventionally attractive of the 4 sisters, with golden blonde hair and cornflower blue eyes that initially endeared her to the town's male population. Her beauty and apparent innocence made her invaluable for maintaining the establishment's respectable facade and for managing the more delicate aspects of their criminal enterprise. Despite her youthful appearance, she possessed a steel-hard determination that became evident to anyone who crossed her wishes or threatened the sisters' operations. A large 3-story building at the end of Main Street that had previously housed Herman Goldstein's failed mercantile establishment was rented by the sisters. The building, constructed of sturdy pine with a stone foundation that extended deeper underground than most structures in town, offered over 5,000 square feet of space across 3 floors, plus an extensive basement area that Goldstein had excavated for storing merchandise during the building's original construction. A full year's rent in advance was paid by the sisters, an unusual practice that impressed their landlord, merchant banker Samuel Rothschild, who noted in his business diary that few tenants possess such financial resources or confidence in their business prospects. Within 2 months, they had transformed the space into what they called the Golden Rose, ostensibly a boarding house and restaurant that catered to the town's small but growing population of women. Considerable expense and effort were required for the transformation, including the purchase of furniture, linens, kitchen equipment, and decorative items that created an atmosphere of refinement rarely seen in Silver Creek. Lace curtains from San Francisco were imported by the sisters, 2 pianos were purchased from failing hotels in Virginia City and Carson City, a substantial collection of books was acquired and arranged in an impressive library for their guests' entertainment, and gas lights were even installed throughout the building, a luxury that few establishments in Silver Creek could afford. The first floor served as a restaurant and social area for respectable female guests, including the wives of successful mine foremen like Martha Kowalski and Sarah O'Brien, the town school teacher Miss Catherine Peaton, 2 seamstresses who served the community's modest population of women, several shopkeepers' wives, and the occasional female relative visiting from back east. A reputation for cleanliness, excellent food, reasonable prices, and refined conversation was quickly gained by the establishment, a stark contrast to the rough accommodations available elsewhere in Silver Creek, where travelers typically slept in shared rooms above saloons or in crude boarding houses that offered little more than a bed and basic shelter. However, observant residents soon noticed that the Golden Rose served multiple purposes that would become central to understanding the sisters' eventual crimes. The building's 2nd floor, accessible through a separate entrance on the side street that faced away from the main thoroughfare, operated as Silver Creek's most upscale brothel. Unlike the crude establishments that dotted the main street with their painted signs and gaudy decorations, the Golden Rose's second-floor operation maintained an atmosphere of discretion and luxury that attracted the town's most sophisticated and wealthy clientele. 10 elegantly appointed rooms were featured in the upstairs establishment, each furnished with quality furniture imported from San Francisco, thick carpets, silk wallpapers, crystal lamps, and amenities like private wash basins, mirrors, and even small libraries, luxuries that seemed impossible to obtain in such a remote location. Classical artwork, quality musical instruments, and even a collection of fine wines and spirits had been somehow acquired by the sisters, creating an ambience more suited to a high-class establishment in San Francisco or Denver than a desert mining town. The third floor, which the sisters claimed was reserved for their private living quarters, actually served as temporary housing for women who had responded to their employment advertisements but had not yet been assigned permanent roles within the establishment. This floor would later prove central to understanding how the sisters managed to control and eventually eliminate their victims without arousing immediate suspicion from other residents or guests. The first documented disappearance occurred in late August 1870, just 3 months after the Everhart sisters' arrival in Silver Creek, during the week when desert temperatures finally dropped below 90 degrees for the first time since early June. Maria Fernandez, a 19-year-old girl from a struggling Mexican-American family in Carson City, had come to work at the Golden Rose after responding to an advertisement seeking young women of good character for domestic service in a respectable establishment offering steady wages, comfortable accommodations, and opportunities for advancement. Desperate family circumstances had motivated Maria's journey to Silver Creek, circumstances that would later prove typical of the sisters' preferred victims. Her father, Diego Fernandez, worked as a day laborer when construction jobs were available, but steady employment remained scarce in Carson City's competitive labor market, where anti-Mexican prejudice often prevented Hispanic workers from securing stable positions. A persistent cough that had worsened throughout the summer was suffered by her mother, Elena, requiring expensive medicine that the family could barely afford even when Diego found work. Maria's 4 younger siblings, 3 brothers aged 8, 12, and 14, and a sister aged 10, depended on whatever income Maria could contribute to the household's survival. The advertisement that attracted Maria had appeared in the Carson City Daily Appeal on July 20, 1870, positioned prominently on the second page among notices for various employment opportunities. The carefully worded text, composed by Margot Everhart, who specialized in crafting appealing recruitment materials, promised steady employment for industrious young ladies of good character, domestic service in respectable boarding house in prosperous mining community. Room, board, and competitive wages provided. Excellent opportunity for reliable workers seeking stable employment and personal advancement. References required. Apply in writing to Miss M. Everhart, Silver Creek, Nevada Territory. Maria's letter of application, later found among the sisters' possessions during the investigation, revealed both her desperation and her genuine qualifications for domestic work. Written in careful Spanish with an English translation provided by Father Miguel Santos, the local priest who assisted immigrant families with correspondence, the letter described her experience helping to manage her family's household, her ability to cook traditional Mexican dishes as well as American meals, her skills in cleaning and performing various domestic tasks, and her eagerness to work hard in exchange for the opportunity to send money home to support her ailing mother and younger siblings. Margot's response, dated August 1, 1870, exemplified the careful manipulation the sisters used to attract and control their victims. The letter expressed satisfaction with Maria's qualifications and invited her to begin employment immediately, explaining that a comfortable room had been prepared for her on the 3rd floor and that she could expect to earn $4 per week plus room and board, wages that seemed extraordinarily generous compared to the limited opportunities available to young Mexican-American women in Carson City, where domestic workers typically earned less than $2 per week with far less comfortable accommodations. Detailed instructions for reaching Silver Creek were also included in the letter, assuring Maria that she would be met at Heinrich Muller's general store upon her arrival, and emphasizing the respectability of the establishment and the safety she could expect as an employee of such a well-regarded business. Most importantly, the letter requested detailed information about Maria's family situation, including their financial circumstances, her father's employment prospects, the health of family members, and whether anyone in Carson City would be expecting regular communication from her. Maria's letters home during her first month at the Golden Rose revealed both her initial satisfaction with her new position and subtle signs of the manipulation that would eventually seal her fate. Her first letter, dated August 15, 1870, expressed gratitude for the clean, comfortable room she had been given on the third floor and praised the kindness of the Everhart Sisters, whom she described as refined ladies who treat their employees with consideration and respect rarely shown to Mexican girls in other establishments. She mentioned that her duties included cleaning, cooking, and serving meals to the boarding house's female guests, work that seemed appropriate and not overly demanding compared to the harsh labor she had expected. However, her subsequent letters contained hints of confusion and unease that would later prove significant to investigators attempting to reconstruct the sisters' methods. Maria wrote that Adelaide had asked extensive questions about her family's circumstances, including their financial situation, her father's employment prospects, her mother's medical condition, and whether anyone in Carson City would be expecting regular communication from her. While Adelaide claimed this information was necessary for employment records and to ensure Maria's welfare, the questioning seemed unusually thorough and personal for a domestic service position. More troubling, Maria's third letter, dated September 2, 1870, described increasing restrictions on her movements and communication that seemed increasingly unusual for an employee in good standing. She explained that Wilhelmina had asked her to limit her correspondence with family to once every 2 weeks, claiming that frequent letter writing interfered with her work duties and created unnecessary postal expenses. She also mentioned that she had been moved from her original comfortable room on the third floor to a smaller, windowless room in the basement, supposedly to make space for a new guest, though Maria had seen no evidence of additional boarders requiring accommodation. Most ominously, Maria's final letter, dated September 12, 1870, mentioned strange sounds during nighttime hours that seemed to come from other parts of the basement, sounds that Adelaide dismissed as rats or settling wood when Maria inquired about them. She also wrote about meeting 2 other young women who were supposedly fellow employees, but whom she was instructed not to speak with directly as they were being trained for specialized duties that required complete concentration and isolation from distractions. Maria's letters stopped abruptly after September 12, a silence that initially caused little concern for her family, who assumed she was simply busy with her new responsibilities and following the sisters' instructions about limiting correspondence. A pattern of gradually isolating their victims from family contacts before implementing their final plans had been established by the sisters, using seemingly reasonable explanations to justify reduced communication while gathering the information they would later need to fabricate convincing explanations for sudden departures. When Maria's worried father, Diego Fernandez, made the difficult and expensive journey to Silver Creek in early October, traveling by wagon over rough mountain roads that required 3 days of uncomfortable travel and consumed most of his limited savings, he found the Everhart sisters sympathetic but unhelpful. Speaking through Heinrich Müller, who served as translator, Greta explained that Maria had left suddenly during the previous week, claiming she had received word of an extraordinary opportunity in San Francisco, where a wealthy family had offered her a position as a personal maid with wages of $8 per week, an amount that seemed almost impossibly generous. A hastily written note allegedly in Maria's handwriting was produced by her, thanking the sisters for their kindness but explaining her need to depart immediately to take advantage of this unexpected opportunity. The note, written in English with several Spanish phrases interspersed, seemed to match Maria's writing style at first glance, though Diego noticed subtle differences that made him uncomfortable. The paper appeared to have been aged deliberately with coffee stains and exposure to heat, and the ink seemed different from that used in Maria's previous letters home. When Diego pressed for more details about her departure, the sisters' story contained numerous inconsistencies that became more apparent as he continued his questioning. They claimed Maria had left before dawn to avoid the desert heat, yet also insisted she had packed all her belongings and received her final wages, which would have required considerable time and noise that should have awakened other residents in the building's close quarters. Margot claimed to have personally said goodbye to Maria and wished her well in her new position, but couldn't provide specific details about the family that had supposedly hired her or the circumstances of their offer. A disturbingly similar pattern was followed by the second disappearance, a pattern that would later be recognized as evidence of the sisters' systematic approach to selecting and eliminating their victims. In November 1870, Charlotte Weber, a 22-year-old German immigrant who had been working as a seamstress in Virginia City, arrived at the Golden Rose seeking employment after responding to another carefully crafted advertisement that had appeared in German-language newspapers throughout Nevada and California. Charlotte's background exemplified the vulnerable circumstances that made women ideal targets for the Sisters operation. She had arrived in America 18 months earlier as part of a large group of German immigrants seeking opportunities in the American West, but her journey had been marked by tragedy and isolation that left her without the family connections that might have protected her from predators. Her parents and younger brother had died during the Atlantic crossing, victims of the cholera epidemic that swept through their ship's overcrowded steerage compartments, leaving Charlotte alone in a strange country where she spoke limited English and knew no one. Her exceptional skill with needle and thread had enabled her to find work in Virginia City, where she specialized in creating and repairing the elaborate dresses favored by the wives of successful miners and businessmen. However, the economic downturn that began in late 1870 had reduced demand for luxury goods, and Charlotte found herself competing with several other seamstresses for an increasingly limited number of customers. The advertisement for domestic work at the Golden Rose appeared at a time when Charlotte was facing eviction from her small room above a dry goods store and desperately needed steady employment to avoid complete destitution. Throughout 1871 and 1872, a disturbing pattern emerged that would later horrify investigators who finally pieced together the Sisters' methodology. Young women continued to arrive at the Golden Rose in increasing numbers, drawn by advertisements promising respectable employment and fair wages that appeared in newspapers throughout Nevada, California, Colorado, Utah, and other Western territories where economic hardship created pools of vulnerable women seeking opportunities for stable employment and financial security. An exceptionally sophisticated recruitment system had been developed by the four sisters that exploited the desperate circumstances of women on the American frontier while minimizing the risk of detection through careful victim selection and systematic elimination of potential witnesses. Each sister specialized in different aspects of the operation. Greta handled overall strategy and corruption of local officials, Wilhelmina managed financial records and disposal of stolen property, Margot controlled recruitment and correspondence with potential victims, and Adelaide supervised the physical aspects of imprisonment and murder. Their advertisements appeared in newspapers throughout the Western Territories, always promising opportunities for industrious young ladies of good character in language carefully crafted to appeal to women seeking respectable employment while remaining vague enough to avoid specific commitments that might create legal obligations or attract unwanted attention from authorities. Separate post office boxes in Carson City, Virginia City, Sacramento, Denver, and Salt Lake City were maintained by the sisters to create the impression of a larger, more established organization with connections throughout the region. Margot's correspondence with potential recruits demonstrated the psychological sophistication that made their operation so devastatingly effective. Her letters emphasized the respectability of their establishment, the safety and comfort of their accommodations, the opportunity for reliable women to advance within their organization, and the sisters' understanding of the unique challenges faced by women trying to make their way in the difficult environment of the American frontier. Different recruitment approaches for different types of victims had been developed by her: sympathetic appeals to family obligation for women supporting relatives, promises of education and refinement for those seeking social advancement, and offers of protection and security for those fleeing difficult circumstances. More sinisterly, Margot's initial correspondence requested detailed information about each applicant's family situation, financial circumstances, local connections, language skills, and educational background, information that would later prove crucial in determining who could disappear without triggering unwanted attention from family members or law enforcement. Women with large families, steady employment histories, strong community ties, or connections to influential people rarely received responses to their inquiries, while those whose background suggested isolation, desperation, or vulnerability were eagerly invited to begin employment immediately. The sisters' method of operation became increasingly refined over time as they learned from each successful crime and identified ways to reduce risk while maximizing profit from their expanding criminal enterprise. New arrivals were initially treated with apparent kindness and consideration, given comfortable accommodations in rooms on the building's third floor, and assigned light duties around the boarding house that seemed appropriate for domestic servants. This period of apparent contentment served multiple purposes. It allowed the sisters to evaluate each woman's potential value both as a temporary employee and as an ultimate victim, while also establishing a pattern of happiness and satisfaction that could be referenced in fabricated farewell letters. During this evaluation period, which typically lasted between 2 and 8 weeks depending on various factors including the victim's family connections and the sisters' current capacity for managing multiple simultaneous operations, extensive information about each woman's background, family relationships, writing style, personal habits, fears, dreams, and financial resources was gathered by the sisters. Their new employees were encouraged to share stories about their past, their hopes for the future, and their concerns about their current circumstances, with the sisters presenting themselves as sympathetic listeners who understood the challenges faced by young women trying to make their way in the difficult environment of the American frontier. This information would later be used to craft believable explanations for sudden departures and to forge convincing farewell messages that would satisfy family members' concerns without triggering investigations. Detailed psychological profiles of each victim were maintained by the sisters in Wilhelmina's carefully organized records, documenting handwriting samples, vocabulary preferences, personal concerns, family relationships, and other details that enabled them to create authentic-seeming communications long after their victims had been murdered. The most chilling aspect of the sisters' operation was their patience and systematic approach to each phase of their crimes. They rarely acted immediately upon a woman's arrival, instead waiting weeks or even months before implementing their final plans. This delay served several crucial purposes. It allowed any initial family concerns to subside as regular letters established a pattern of communication and apparent contentment. It created the impression of established employment that made sudden departures seem more plausible. It gave the sisters time to fully understand each victim's personality and circumstances, and it enabled them to coordinate multiple simultaneous operations without overwhelming their capacity to maintain control and avoid detection. By 1873, the Golden Rose had become Silver Creek's most respected women's establishment with a reputation for providing safe, comfortable accommodations and employment opportunities for women from throughout the Western Territories. Local residents had grown accustomed to the steady stream of young women who arrived seeking work, and the equally steady departure of employees who supposedly left for better opportunities elsewhere. The constant westward migration of the era made such explanations entirely believable, as young women frequently moved between towns and territories in search of better circumstances or following family members who had relocated for work or health reasons. Sheriff Caleb Harrison, when occasionally pressed about missing persons reports from concerned family members, showed remarkable disinterest in investigating the disappearances that seemed to cluster around the Golden Rose. Years later, investigators would discover that Harrison had been a regular customer of the Golden Rose's upstairs establishment and had received frequent gifts from the Everhart Sisters, including cash payments that far exceeded his modest salary, expensive whiskey and cigars that he could never have afforded on his official income, and other considerations that ensured his cooperation in dismissing concerns about missing women. Harrison's willingness to dismiss concerns about missing women as the natural result of frontier mobility proved crucial to the sisters' continued operations. When family members like Diego Fernandez attempted to file formal complaints or request investigations, Harrison would explain that young women frequently left mining towns for better opportunities elsewhere, particularly immigrants who often moved between communities following seasonal work or family obligations. His official reports, when he bothered to file them at all, invariably concluded that missing women had departed voluntarily for personal reasons and that no criminal activity was suspected. Relationships with other key figures in Silver Creek's power structure had also been cultivated by the sisters, ensuring that potential threats to their operation would be neutralized before they could develop into serious problems. Heinrich Müller, the general store owner who controlled much of the town's commercial activity and informal communication networks, received regular orders for expensive imported goods that the sisters purchased for the Golden Rose's operations. These transactions, which generated substantial profits for Müller's business, created a financial incentive for him to support the sisters' reputation as successful businesswomen rather than investigate inconsistencies in their stories about departing employees. A particularly troubling relationship with the Everhart sisters had been developed by Dr. Elias Hoffman, Silver Creek's only physician, a relationship that would later draw intense scrutiny from investigators. Hoffman, a middle-aged man whose medical license had been revoked in Pennsylvania under mysterious circumstances involving the suspicious deaths of several female patients, had arrived in Silver Creek shortly after the sisters and quickly became one of their most trusted associates. his past professional troubles, which included allegations of performing illegal abortions, providing narcotics to individuals without legitimate medical need, and conducting unauthorized medical experiments on vulnerable patients, made him vulnerable to blackmail and eager to maintain his position as the town's only medical authority. By 1874, the Everhart Sisters had refined their operation into what can only be described as a systematic killing enterprise that operated with the efficiency of a legitimate business while generating enormous profits through the systematic murder of vulnerable women. Their success stemmed from their ability to maintain multiple distinct reputations within Silver Creek's community. The sisters continued to be regarded as respectable businesswomen and valuable community members, while their careful management of information and systematic corruption of local officials ensured that troubling questions about their activities were consistently dismissed or suppressed. An extensive network of accomplices and business partners had also been developed by the sisters, though most remained unaware of the full extent of their crimes. Tom Brennan, a former convict who worked as a handyman and general laborer, performed various tasks around the Golden Rose that required unusual discretion and physical strength. Brennan, a massive man with a violent past who had served time in territorial prison for assault and robbery, asked few questions about the odd jobs the sisters assigned him, which included digging what they claimed were new privies, storage cellars, and drainage systems, always during nighttime hours when other residents were unlikely to observe his activities. Samuel Garrett, a wagon driver who transported goods between Silver Creek and larger cities throughout the region, had developed a lucrative side business disposing of items that the sisters claimed were surplus property or belongings left behind by former employees. Garrett's regular routes enabled him to sell these items in distant markets where their origins would not be questioned, and his discretion was ensured through generous payments that supplemented his legitimate income. He never questioned why the sisters always had such large quantities of women's clothing, jewelry, and personal items to dispose of, or why they insisted on conducting these transactions in secrecy. The sisters' method of selecting victims had become increasingly calculated and sophisticated by this period. They focused on women who met specific criteria designed to minimize the risk of discovery while maximizing the potential profit from each crime, those with minimal family connections who could disappear without immediate notice, limited financial resources that made extensive searches unlikely, poor English skills or education that might make them more trusting of authority figures, backgrounds that made them unlikely to be missed quickly by law enforcement agencies, and personal circumstances that would make sudden departures seem plausible to anyone who inquired about their whereabouts. Mexican and Chinese immigrant women proved particularly vulnerable targets, as racial prejudices of the era meant their disappearances generated little concern from local authorities who viewed such women as transient and disposable. The sisters also targeted women fleeing abusive relationships, those with criminal backgrounds who might be reluctant to contact law enforcement, and individuals whose families lived in distant locations where communication was difficult and expensive. Letters from family members seeking information about missing women began to arrive more frequently at the Golden Rose as the sisters' operation expanded, but they had developed a comprehensive response system that consistently deflected suspicion while maintaining their reputation for helpfulness and concern. A collection of sample handwriting from former employees was maintained by the sisters, allowing them to forge believable farewell notes when necessary, and detailed backstories for the fictional opportunities and relationships that supposedly attracted their victims to leave Silver Creek had been created by them. Wilhelmina's record-keeping had evolved into a sophisticated accounting system that treated human lives as business assets while tracking every aspect of their criminal enterprise. Her ledgers documented each victim's arrival date, personal information gathered during the evaluation period, estimated value of their possessions, the method and date of their murder, and the profits generated from selling their belongings. The records also included detailed notes about families' responses to missing persons reports, enabling the sisters to monitor the aftermath of each disappearance and take additional action if their explanations failed to satisfy concerned relatives. The physical evidence of their crimes accumulated in the building's extensively modified basement, which the sisters had gradually expanded through Tom Brennan's nighttime excavations and construction projects. What had begun as a simple storage area had evolved into a complex network of underground chambers that extended far beyond the building's original foundation, reaching under the adjacent alley and connecting to natural caves in the area's rocky substrate. The sisters claimed these expansions were necessary for storing supplies and accommodating the boarding house's growing business, but the subterranean layout suggested far more sinister purposes. The basement had been subdivided into multiple specialized areas that served different functions in the sisters' criminal operation. The main area contained storage rooms for victims' belongings, which were sorted and catalogued like merchandise in a warehouse, with valuable items separated for sale and personal mementos kept as trophies. Adjacent chambers had been equipped with heavy chains and restraints, soundproofing materials, and drainage systems that facilitated the imprisonment and murder of victims without alerting other residents to the activities taking place below ground. During this period, the sisters also began to diversify their criminal activities beyond simple murder for profit. Elaborate blackmail schemes targeting their brothel's prominent clients had been developed by them, using Greta's intelligence and the sisters' collective attention to detail to gather compromising information about territorial officials, mine owners, railroad executives, and other influential men who could not afford public scandal. Adelaide's beauty and apparent innocence made her particularly effective at extracting secrets from clients who underestimated her intelligence and ambition. This blackmail operation provided the sisters with both additional income and crucial protection from law enforcement scrutiny. Sheriff Harrison's dismissive attitude toward missing persons reports became more understandable when investigators later discovered that the sisters possessed detailed records of his gambling debts, drinking problems, inappropriate relationships with several local women, and his regular visits to their establishment's upstairs rooms. Similar leverage existed over other officials who might otherwise have been inclined to investigate the growing number of disappearances associated with the Golden Rose. Connections with criminal networks in other territories had also been established by the sisters, enabling them to expand their operations beyond Silver Creek while maintaining the appearance of operating a simple boarding house and restaurant. Correspondence with individuals in San Francisco, Denver, Salt Lake City, and other western cities was maintained by them, individuals who assisted in disposing of stolen property, providing false documents for various fraudulent schemes, and recruiting additional victims who could be transported to Silver Creek under false pretenses. The sisters' carefully constructed operation began to show signs of strain in early 1876 when they made a critical error that would eventually lead to their downfall. The mistake came in the form of Rose McGillicuddy, a spirited 26-year-old Irish immigrant who had arrived in Silver Creek seeking employment after losing her position as a governess in Sacramento when her employer's family encountered financial difficulties during the economic depression that had affected much of California's mining industry. Qualities that set her apart from the sisters' typical victims and should have disqualified her from consideration under their usual selection criteria were possessed by Rose. She was literate, assertive, well-educated, and maintained regular correspondence with a large extended family in Boston who would immediately notice if her letters stopped arriving. Her education, though not formal, was extensive enough to enable her to work as a governess for wealthy families, and her confidence in dealing with authority figures made her unlikely to accept restrictions or explanations that might seem suspicious to someone with less experience navigating complex social situations. More importantly, Rose came from a stable background with strong family connections that should have made her disappearance immediately noticeable to people who possessed the resources and motivation to demand thorough investigations. Her father, Patrick McGillicuddy, worked as a foreman at a textile mill in Boston and earned sufficient income to support his large family while maintaining regular communication with relatives throughout the American West. Her mother, Bridget, came from a family with connections to Boston's Irish political establishment, relationships that could potentially bring pressure on territorial and federal law enforcement agencies if Rose were to vanish under suspicious circumstances. Rose had responded to one of the sisters' advertisements that appeared in the Sacramento Daily Union on January 15, 1876, during a period when her employment prospects seemed particularly bleak due to the economic difficulties that affected many wealthy families throughout the West. The advertisement, composed by Margot using her most sophisticated recruitment language, promised exceptional opportunities for educated young women capable of domestic management, child care responsibilities, and social instruction in a refined frontier establishment serving discerning clientele. Her letter of application, later recovered during the investigation, revealed both her qualifications and her family situation in detail that should have warned the sisters away from selecting her as a potential victim. Rose described her experience as a governess for 3 different families in California, her ability to teach children reading, writing, arithmetic, and social graces, her familiarity with household management responsibilities that enabled her to supervise other domestic workers, and her fluency in both English and Gaelic that made her valuable for working with immigrant families. More significantly, she mentioned her large family in Boston, her regular correspondence with relatives throughout the country, and her plans to eventually return east when she had saved sufficient money to establish herself in business or marry respectably. However, the sisters' criminal enterprise had become so successful and profitable that they apparently grew overconfident in their ability to eliminate any woman who might threaten their operation, regardless of her background or connections. A sense of invulnerability had been created by the steady stream of victims over nearly 6 years, a sense that led them to take risks they might have avoided during their earlier, more cautious period of operation. Margot's response to Rose's application, dated February 1, 1876, eagerly invited her to begin employment immediately at wages of $6 per week, plus room and board, compensation that was generous enough to overcome Rose's initial hesitation about traveling to such a remote location to work for employers she had never met. The letter emphasized the sisters' appreciation for educated women who could serve as role models for other employees and assist with the establishment's reputation for respectability and refinement. Within days of Rose's arrival at the Golden Rose in mid-February 1876, she began to notice disturbing patterns that previous victims had either missed or been unable to act upon due to their more vulnerable circumstances. Her education and confidence enabled her to observe details that less sophisticated women might have dismissed, and her family connections gave her both the motivation and ability to document her concerns in ways that could eventually reach law enforcement authorities. Several rooms and areas that appeared to be permanently locked or restricted were included in the building's layout, despite the sisters' claims that they were used for storing supplies, seasonal equipment, or accommodating special guests who required privacy. When Rose offered to help with cleaning or organizing these storage areas, demonstrating the kind of initiative that had made her valuable as a governess, all four sisters became evasive and insisted that the rooms contain personal belongings or sensitive business materials that required no attention from employees. Strange sounds emanated from the basement during nighttime hours, not the typical creaking and settling noises of an old wooden building, but deliberate movements, muffled voices, and what sounded like construction work or excavation activities. The sounds typically began well after midnight and continued until dawn, suggesting activities that the sisters preferred to conduct when other residents were unlikely to be awake and observant. When Rose mentioned these disturbances during casual conversation, Adelaide became visibly nervous and claimed the sounds were caused by rats, desert animals, or the building's heating system, explanations that seemed implausible to someone with Rose's intelligence and experience. Most troubling, personal belongings hidden in various locations throughout the building that clearly belonged to other women who had supposedly left town for better opportunities elsewhere were discovered by Rose. These items were not simply forgotten possessions that might be expected when someone departed in haste, but valuable personal effects and sentimental items that no woman would voluntarily abandon, jewelry with obvious family significance, religious items like crucifixes and prayer books with personal inscriptions, professional tools like sewing equipment and medical instruments, photographs of family members, and letters from loved ones that revealed intimate family relationships and circumstances. Rose's letter to her sister Margaret, dated March 10, 1876, and later recovered by investigators, described her growing concerns with the detailed observations that would prove crucial in eventually exposing the sisters' crimes. The Everhart sisters maintain an impressive facade of respectability and business success, but something feels terribly wrong about this place. I have found women's clothing and personal items hidden in closets and storage areas throughout the building, far more than could be explained by the occasional departures I have witnessed since my arrival. The sisters claim these belongings were left behind by former employees who departed suddenly for various opportunities, but the quantity and nature of these items suggest a much more troubling explanation. Rose continued, most disturbing is a collection of jewelry, family photographs, and personal mementos that no woman would willingly leave behind, including a silver locket containing photographs of children, sewing scissors with carved ivory handles that represent a substantial investment for any seamstress, a German prayer book with a woman's name inscribed inside the cover, and letters from family members expressing concern about not hearing from their daughters or sisters. I have counted belongings from at